Adventure in Pipeman on W4CY Radio.
Wake up, America! It's time for the Adventures of Pipeman on W4CY.com, West Palm Beach's #1 internet radio station. Here's your host, the Pipeman.
This is the Pipeman here on the Adventures of Pipeman W4CY Radio, and I'm extremely excited about our next guest because listening to his music goes back to when I'm so little I probably wouldn't have known about music if it weren't for older brothers, as it was back then. So let's welcome to his show, Jon Lodge. How are you?
Hi, very good, thank you.
Nice. Yeah, so the first time I heard the Moody Blues was stealing one of my older brother's albums. He's like 11 years older than me. So I was rifling as a little kid through his albums. I'm like, oh, this one looks cool. Let me listen to this.
I'm grateful for everyone with an older brother.
Right? Because it was like that back then, right? You know.
Absolutely.
That's how you got into it.
Yeah, and my sister, who was 4 years older than me, when I was sort of 10 years old, she walked out of the house with a new boyfriend and said, "See you later, alligator." I thought, what on earth is she on about? And that was my first sort of introduction to rock and roll in a way. I had no idea what she meant. I found out 3 years later.
Wow. See, it is pretty cool. And man, what does it feel like to be making music all these years? I'm sure when you first started, you could never imagine, talking about your music this many decades later.
No, when rock and roll really hit me, it hit me like a sledgehammer when I was 13. Before then, I had no music at all. But when I first heard rock and roll rhythm, it took over. And it was really like a sledgehammer. And I had to be part of it, bought a guitar, or my mum bought me the guitar for about $5, second-hand German guitar, acoustic. But I learned by going into my bedroom, playing this guitar hour after hour. I found out how it worked. There was no one at that time in the UK that was teaching rock and roll. It didn't exist. You could not find anyone to teach you. So you had to learn yourself. And I remember you used to sit watching like the Perry Como show or something like that. Because on there they have the Every Brothers or Roy Orbison. And I used to watch what they were doing with their guitar, how they were playing it, and trying to copy it like that. It's interesting times.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear that. And even, I think to this day, the whole thing of rock and roll is experimenting with your musicianship. And I think that's what you did way back then, because there was nobody to really teach. So you had to experiment and figure out your own sound.
Yeah, I remember playing, I like the cello. I love the cello. The sound of a cello. I've got a cello in my band now. It's fantastic. But I remember playing the cello on two songs for the Moody Blues, Ride by Seesaw and The Balance. And I didn't realize until 4 years later, when I actually hired a cellist, that I'd been tuning the cello wrong all those years. But it didn't matter, you know. We were experimenting. It's like playing a six-string guitar upside down, and
Right?
you know, it's experimenting, finding what works for you, and what sound you can get out of your instrument that no one else can, really.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I find people from your era that are musicians, they did develop new sounds. Like even, you know, you take several bands from that era and they just created sounds you never heard before, you know?
Well, we grew up, of course, with people who were making amplifiers, because Jim Marshall started the Marshall ampli, and that was the sound of English rock, really. And I've bought one of his first amplifiers he ever built, and it was amazing because we talked to these guys and said, we want something that we could play 400 watts through, and the speakers will make the bass sound fantastic. And he came up with these 4 speakers enclosures with Celestion speakers, 12-inch speakers. And it was a brilliant time, you know, finding new sounds that you could take into the studio and record.
Yeah. And I find, so no matter what genre of rock and roll somebody is in today, whether they're a musician or just a listener, I don't care if it's the most extreme heavy metal or the softest rock, everybody, the common denominator with even the gatekeepers is to love bands from your area and to love like the Moody Blues. Like we can all agree on that. We may not agree on certain bands nowadays, like, oh, they're not this or that, but we all believe that bands like yours was the core of all rock music today.
I think it didn't exist between us before then. You know, in England, in the late 50s and early 60s, it was all American iconic artists like Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran. We couldn't emulate those people. They're icons, and English people couldn't do that. And we had to find our own way of portraying our music. And that's what it became. We realized it was the music that was important, not the iconic person. And, you know, on the Moody Blues, we never ever put a photograph of the band on the front cover of any of our albums, because it was the music we wanted to get over to an audience, not us individually.
I love hearing that. And speaking of albums, okay, you just released Days of Futures Past, My Sojourn. And man, does it blow your mind that it is so popular that, you know, first released in the UK, but then there was such a demand in the US that now we have it here in the US?
It's fantastic, unbelievable. You know, I was going on the road a couple of years ago, and I thought, how can I do something which continues the music of the Moody Blues? And I called my musical director, Alan Hewitt, who's my keyboard player, and said, Alan, could we do Days of Future Past live on stage? And he said, why not? Just like that, why not? And I thought, how do I do it? I thought, I know what I should do. I should call Graeme Edge and go and see Graeme Edge. And I went to see Graeme and said, Graeme, I want to do Days of Future Past live on stage. Would you re-record your poetry for me and I'll film you? He said, John, I'd love to. I've never recorded my own poetry. I'd love to be part of the album. So I filmed him, and I thought that was a blessing I had. And when we were rehearsing the concert, I suddenly thought, just a moment, this is like a history of my life here from 68 when we released Days of Future Past, 67, and till today. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to record this. Not a live album. I thought we'd made too much effort to make it a live album. I wanted to go in the studio. So I went to the studio, and I asked Jon Davison from YES to join me, singing a couple of the songs. And we recorded Days of Future Past, my Sojourn. In actual fact, my daughter-in-law took the photograph on the front of the album as well. It seemed to sum up the whole album for me.
That photograph right there?
That's the one, yes. Fantastic.
It is cool. I'm somebody, I'm old school, so I love album covers. I think it's part of the whole experience. That's how I bought albums when I was a kid. You couldn't hear them like we can now. It's like, ooh, that album looks cool. Let me buy that. You didn't even know if it was going to be good or not.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that I love the artwork on this album. So it is something that I would look at that if I never even knew who the Moody Blues were, which would be virtually impossible. I would still want to buy that album and listen to it.
Thank you very much. It's strange because when I didn't realize it at the time, but when I was like 8 or 9 years old, there's a really old lady used to live next door to me, and she was on her own all the while. And I used to go around there and talk to her. I was like 8, 9. And on the wall, there was a picture almost the same as my album sleeve with my wife and myself being on it. It looked almost the same. And when I saw the picture, it just gave me an enormous flashback to that time. I thought, the circle is complete.
Yes, I love it. And what makes it even more complete is that we have some rescheduled dates that you're going to be doing here during the summer. Especially, I'm in South Florida, so I'm pretty excited. You're going to be in Fort Lauderdale on August 3rd, and you'll also be in even me in Florida. I'm not sure if I pronounce it right, but Immokalee.
Yeah, it's a strange word, isn't it? Yeah.
But and man, it's so cool too. I love seeing artists that have been like great musicians still touring to this day. To me, I think the difference between your generation and these newer generations of bands is that I think if you weren't on stage doing it live, you would you might not be here. Like I take a lot of people, like I look at so many artists that people are like, well, how do they keep doing it? And my answer is because they can't afford to not keep doing it. It's just such a passion.
Absolutely. I play every day, even today. I played this morning. I play every day. I've been in the studio during the last year, and I've recorded 4 new songs, which will be released later this year. I love rock and roll. As I say, the fire ignited when I was 13, and the passion has been with me ever since. I just love music.
See, that just proves you're a true musician, because there are 2 types, as you know. There's the people that are in music for the passion of the music, and then there's the others that get into it for other reasons, like they want to be a rock star. And going back to what you were saying before, they're the ones that put their face on the on the album. So I love what you said, and you can always tell. I know I can. If I go to a show, you can tell if the musician is up there because they just love playing music, or if they're doing it for another reason. And I think there is no other reason but passion for music, to be honest.
Yeah, I love picking my bass up and playing and finding something. There's always something new you can find. Always. There's not many notes, but you can always find something new. And just turns you on. It brings a wave of joy to you. Oh, listen to this.
Yeah. And, I find musicians of your age, they played all different types of instruments. That's why they were true musicians. And then it's also interesting. I found a lot, like even as an example, I didn't even know, and I was a huge Beatles fan, I didn't know that Paul was originally a guitarist, and he basically drew the short straw to be the bassist.
It's really interesting because when I grew up, when I was at school, there was a cafe called Eddie's Cafe, and like a soldier shop. And every lunchtime when I was at school, I used to go in there because he had a rock holder jukebox, and I used to drop my money in the slot, which my mum had given me for lunch. But I used it to play records, and I used to listen to Fats Domino, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, and I could hear that left-hand boogie playing on the piano, and that's what turned me on. I didn't hear the rest of the songs, really. I just heard this throbbing left-arm boogie piano. And I learned on the guitar all those riffs.
Nice.
When I learned it, because there was no electric basses in England at the time.
Right.
So I learned everything on the bottom four strings of a regular guitar. And when a bass guitar turned up in England, and I bought one, I was suddenly playing all these riffs on the bass, and it turned me on.
Nice.
I thought, that's what I want to do forever. And I was in my music shop one day on a Saturday morning, where all musicians go of a Saturday with all the other musicians. And there in the window, it said, direct from the USA, precision sunburst bass. And I was 15. And I remember dashing home to my dad and saying, Dad, you've got to help me. I've got to buy this bass. And he did. He helped me, and I bought that bass. And I've recorded nearly every Moody Blues song on that bass. And I still use it today for recording.
Wow. And little did Dad know, I'm sure, that now today you would be considered one of the 10 most influential bass players on the planet. So look at that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Love it. Well, everybody should go to your website, jonlodge.com. And I believe there it has connects to everything for you, and tour dates, music, merch, all that good stuff. I look forward to you being here in Fort Lauderdale on August 3rd. And hey, thanks for giving us such great music and musical therapy for all these years that we desperately need, and to keep it alive. And thanks for being on the Adventures of Pipeman.
Thank you for Pipeman, and good luck, and thank you to all your listeners for keeping the faith. Thank you.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Pipeman on W4CY Radio.
Hey, this is Jon Lodge, and you're listening to the Adventures of Pipeman on W4CY.